What's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you or someone you know? I was at my uncle's house in some countryside with my sister and we were playing hide and seek. My uncle went out to buy some food for us. I was hiding downstairs in this weird closet/attic thing I found. I heard a little banging noise and got a little spooked. I then chalked it up to a little rat or something and continued to hide. I then heard a snore and a groan. I immediately got out and ran to my sister. We both sat at the door together, crying, until my uncle got home. My uncle just laughed it off and we were relieved. A decade later, an old man's dead body was found when my uncle tried to sell the house. It was revealed he was squatting there for almost a decade and he had written in a notebook how he was going to kill my uncle and keep the home for himself, and I think that would have happened if he didn't die. What a creepiest story. Do you have any more details? My uncle said he has had a bad feeling and to test it, he went on vacation for 2 weeks with a ton of food in his fridge and when he came back there was like 3 oranges and a slice of bread, but since he had bad security and valuables were missing as well, he just thought it was a robbery and that's when he decided to sell the house. A month later the man's dead body was found. That's insane. A decade later? Do you think he ever left the closet thing and ran around the house? Yes, of course, the food in the fridge often went missing and we all assumed my uncle ate a lot. How did he survive? Did he just sneak out of the hiding place and get food and water when your uncle was gone? This is crazy to me. This kind of thing actually happens a lot, I feel. And yeah, most people who squat in someone else's house for that long do exactly that. They learn the schedules of the people whose house they're in, and sneak around when everyone is either asleep or not home. All this quarantine must be messing up their schedules. Everyone should check their closets so their squatters don't starve. This happened about 3 years ago or so. I was sitting in the kitchen, and it was around 10 p.m. or so. I heard a really loud thump in the basement. I live alone with 2 dogs so any sound is somewhat frightening to me. So, as I'm walking down the stairs to the basement, I hear the thumping again, in an oddly rhythmic pattern. I creak open the door into the basement bedroom, and I see my dog is just ramming his head and body into the wall, over and over. I can't explain to you how shockingly unnatural looking it was. It looked like he was controlled or something. I called him over, and he stopped and came upstairs with me. 3 hours later, I hear the thumping again. I get out of bed again, however, when I went down to check it, it was my other dog that was ramming his head into the wall. It was like he was possessed. Scared the cheese out of me. Since then, nothing like that has happened, but what an unexplainable event. I'm a biologist that often has to do field work surveying unmaintained private properties in the middle of nowhere. Long story short, we find a body face up in a stream deep in a thickly wooded wetland. The body looked several months old, at least. No clothes, no tools, no shelter, nothing nearby to suggest who he is or how he got there. We couldn't even tell race or gender from what we saw. We call the police and they immediately tell us it's probably the missing person who ditched his car nearby. They apparently searched for weeks with dogs, horses, and ATVs but didn't find any sign of the guy. All they found was his family car loaded with cash and a handgun. They also tell us he seemed to be running from someone or something, real or imagined, they weren't sure. Apparently the man didn't even close his car door, just ditched it at a rail crossing and took off running into the woods in a tremendous hurry. I find his clothes about 30 yards up the stream bank from where the body was found. His pants were neatly folded and placed on top of his nice brown loafers, underpants and socks on top of those. He placed his glasses atop his socks, very orderly and in a nice pile. His shirt and undershirt were hanging from a tree branch right above those as if to dry. I mean, the whole thing creeps me out even a year on. But what unsettles me is the fact that he ran from his family, drove several hours from his home, ditched his car, and fought a mile through briars and thick woods only to stop and carefully fold and hang his clothes before meeting his end. I look him up every now and then and still can't find any more info about what happened or why. I worked with a girl who casually told the story of someone almost kidnapping her little sister. One day she walked outside to tell her 6-year-old sister to come inside, and her sister was climbing into the open door of a car at the end of the driveway. My coworker screamed and the car drove off without the sister. When my wife was little, her friend was abducted and murdered. The day prior to the abduction, my wife was riding her bicycle alone and was frightened by a man in a memorable car that was clearly following her. It turns out that it was the same car that the murderer owned. When my cousin was a teenager, maybe 18 or 19, she and her friends went out to party a lot. In my country you can legally start drinking with 16-18, so most teenagers start going to clubs at 16. Back then, hitchhiking was still pretty common and most teenagers did it to get home or to the city, since only very few had cars of their own. So my cousin and her friend want to go home after a night out and get picked up by a middle-aged guy. He's nice enough and they make small talk while they drive. Suddenly, he takes a turn onto a remote road leading into the woods. He locks the car from the inside and his friendly facade falls. Instead, he's suddenly tense, quiet and determined. My cousin's friend started crying quietly, but my cousin stays calm and starts talking to the man. She tells him about her family, her mom and dad, her brother and sister, and asks if he also has a family. When he tells her that he has a wife and 2 children, she asks for their names and how old they are, which school they go to, what their hobbies are, all while he drives them deeper into the woods. It must have triggered something, because after talking with him for a couple of minutes, he stops his car and breaks down. He starts crying and tells them that things are going well at home, that his marriage is pretty bad and he fears he'll lose his kids. My cousin comforts him during his breakdown and lets him spill his heart out. Eventually, he starts the car again, turns around and drives them home, saying he's sorry. They get out once they reach the street my cousin lived on, and when he drives off, my cousin sees him put a knife on the passenger seat that he had kept hidden next to him. They never hitchhiked again. This reminds me of Austrian triathlete Natalie Burley. 2 weeks after giving birth she went out cycling. A man rammed her with his car, beat her, and then kidnapped her. He locked her in his closet before she passed out. She woke up naked and tied to a chair where he tortured her. She then noticed his orchids and told him she thought they were beautiful, and his entire demeanor changed. He told her he was a gardener, and they eventually started talking about his painful relationships with his parents and ex-girlfriends who betrayed him. Natalie then asks him to not kill her because her newborn son needs her, and to imagine what it would have been like for him, the kidnapper, to grow up without a mother. She then suggests that they both agree that this whole fiasco was just an accident instead. He eventually drives her home and the police tracked him down and arrested him. In both of these cases, these men felt betrayed by their romantic partner and felt the need to vent their anger through violence. Their victims were able to escape through empathizing with them. I was 11 and my brother was 4. It was late at night and we were alone. My mother and stepfather were out, along with my little sister. Since we were not his children, we rarely got to go out with them. I was watching TV and my brother had fallen asleep next to me on the couch. From the couch you could see a large window with sheer curtains. Outside of that window was a parking area. I realized there was a man at the window. He just stood there looking in. This was before cell phones, so I couldn't call my mom. I tried calling my aunt, but she lived in another town and I think she thought I was imagining things. I tried calling the police and they said they'd send someone, but they didn't seem to be taking me seriously either. The man started to try to get the window open. I was paralyzed with fear. At some point I realized I was shaking and this snapped me out of my panic. I tried to shake my brother awake, telling him there was someone trying to break in, but he was so deeply asleep that I could not rouse him. By this time I was near tears and shaking so badly. I couldn't leave my brother there and the man was still trying to get in. As I'm trying to lift/drag him, I hear the front door coming open. It was my family returning. It turns out that they had walked right by the man. He was leaning against a car. He greeted them and asked if they had a lighter for his cigarette. My mom later remarked on how friendly he seemed. I definitely feel like someone was watching out for me and my brother that day. Minutes later and the man would have likely been in the house. When I was a child in New Hampshire, I went exploring by myself and got lost in the woods. I was not worried about it in the least, and was just walking around. All of a sudden, I noticed someone standing about 25 feet away from me, and he was just standing perfectly still facing me. He was all bundled up in a bunch of shirts and jackets, one over the other, and his face was completely hidden by what looked like dirty rags. He was wearing big flat-lensed goggles. He just stood there staring at me. I stared back for a few seconds and then turned and ran. Maybe 30 minutes later I managed to find my way back to the edge of the lake, and was able to get back to where we were staying. Friend of mine had recurring vivid hauntings growing up. He would often get the feeling of a cold clawed hand grabbing his legs while sleeping. Wake up from a nightmare with scratches over his body. See a well-dressed lady wandering around his house. He moved around a lot growing up, and after each move he would have a few months of relief before the lady returned and the hauntings continued. He left for college and the hauntings stopped. Fast forward a few years and he went to visit his sister in a totally different part of the country. As he stepped foot in the house, he instantly felt a cold come over him. He froze, looked at his sister and asked, "She's here, isn't she?" Sister nodded. She said her daughters had been experiencing the same things he had when he was younger. Do you have any creepiest stories? Leave a comment. And subscribe to this channel if you want to see more same videos.